Hi, ninth and 10th grade literature. You're going to hear a little ambient noise going on in the background. I have my windows open. It's a beautiful spring day, so I'm going to enjoy the breeze. Hopefully I can speak loud enough where you won't get too distracted. But we are on our next section of fairy tales, and these fairy tales deal specifically with a man or a boy who actually doesn't always follow what people would think is moral. Like, for instance, they steal, but yet is considered a hero, possibly because the person they're stealing or working against is not really welcomed into society. So, but there's some interesting aspects to these stories that I think you'll enjoy. We can really think of them as our first anti-heroes. We root for them even if they are not morally correct. So let's start with the first one, Jack and the Beanstalk. You may already know this story. That's okay. It is a universal source, so I'm expecting you to know many of the stories we're about to do. But let's start with Jack and the Beanstalk. There was once upon a time a poor widow who had an only son named Jack and a cow named Milky White. And all they had to live on was the milk the cow gave every morning, which they carried to the market and sold. But one morning Milky White gave no milk, and they didn't know what to do. "What shall we do? What shall we do?" said the widow, wringing her hands. "Cheer up, mother. I'll go and work somewhere," said Jack. "We've tried that before. Nobody would take you," said his mother. "We must sell Milky White, and with the money, start a shop or something." "All right, mother," said Jack. "It's market day today, and I'll soon sell Milky White, and then we'll see what we can do." So he took the cow's halter in his hand, and off he started. He hadn't gone too far when he met a funny-looking old man, who said to him, "Good morning, Jack." "Good morning to you," said Jack, and wondered how he knew his name. "Well, Jack, where are you off to?" said the man. "I'm going to the market to sell our cow there." "Oh, you look the proper sort of chap to sell cows," said the man. "I wonder if you know how many beans makes 5. "Two in each hand and one in your mouth," said Jack, as sharp as a needle. "Right you are," said the man, "and here they are. The very beans themselves," he went on, pulling out of his pocket a number of strange-looking beans. "As you are so sharp," said he, "I don't mind doing a swap with you, your cow, for these beans." "Go along," said Jack. "Wouldn't you like it?" "Ah, you don't know what these beans are," said the man. "If you plant them overnight, by morning they grow right up to the sky." "Really?" said Jack. "You don't say so." "Yes, that is so. And if it doesn't turn out to be true, you can have your cow back." "Right," says Jack, and hands him over Milky White's halter and pockets the beans. Back goes Jack home, and as he hadn't gotten very far, it wasn't dusk by the time he got to his door. "Back already, Jack?" said his mother. "I see you haven't got Milky White, so you sold her. How much did you get for her?" "You'll never guess, mother," said Jack. "No, you don't say so. Good boy. £5? 10? 15? No, it can't be 20. "I told you couldn't guess. What do you say to these beans? They're magical. Plant them overnight and—" "What?" said Jack's mother. "Have you been such a fool, such a dolt, such an idiot as to give away my Milky White, the best milker in the parish, and prime beef to boot, for a set of paltry beans? Take that, take that, take that." The idea is she's hitting him here. "And as for your precious beans, here they go out the window. And now off with you to bed. Not a sup shall you drink, and not a bit shall you swallow this very night." So Jack went upstairs to his little room in the attic, and sad and sorry he was, to be sure, as much for his mother's sake as for the loss of his supper. At last he dropped off to sleep. When he woke up, the room looked so funny. The sun was shining into part of it, and yet all the rest was quite dark and shady. So Jack jumped up and dressed himself and went to the window. And what do you think he saw? Why, the beans his mother had thrown out the window into the garden had sprung up into a big beanstalk, which went up and up and up till it reached the sky. So the man spoke the truth after all. The beanstalk grew quite close past Jack's window, so all he had to do was open it and give a jump onto the beanstalk, which ran up just like a big ladder. So Jack climbed, and he 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 climbed, till at last he reached the sky. And when he got there, he found a long, broad road going as straight as a dart. So he walked along, and he walked along, and he walked along, till he came to a great big tall house, and on the doorstep there was a great big tall woman. Okay, we're starting to see that repetition we often find in oral tradition literature, And this case, it's not just about remembering something, climbed and climbed and climbed. It's giving us an idea of how long it would have taken him to climb. He didn't just climb, he climbed and climbed and climbed. It wasn't just a big woman or a tall woman. It was a great big tall woman. So we see these repetitions coming in to help us understand the story a little bit better. Good morning, Mum, said Jack, quite polite-like. Could you be so kind as to give me some breakfast? For he hadn't had anything to eat, the night before, and was as hungry as a hunter. It's breakfast you want, is it? Said the great big tall woman. It's breakfast you'll be if you don't move off from here. My man's an ogre, and there's nothing he likes better than boys broiled on toast. You better be moving on, or he'll be coming. Oh, please, Mum, do give me something to eat, Mum. I've had nothing to eat since yesterday morning. Really and truly, Mum, says Jack. Mum is ma'am. I may as well be broiled as die of hunger. Well, the ogre's wife was not half so bad after all, so she took Jack into the kitchen, gave him a hunk of bread and cheese and a jug of milk. But Jack hadn't half finished with those when thump, thump, thump! The whole house began to tremble with the noise of someone coming. Goodness gracious me, it's my old man, said the ogre's wife. What on earth shall I do? Come along quick and jump in here. And she bundled Jack into the oven just as the ogre was coming in. He was a big one, to be sure. At his belt he had 3 calves strung up by the heels, and he unhooked them and threw them down on the table and said, Here, wife, broil me a couple of these for breakfast. Ah, what's this I smell? Fee, fi, fo, fum. I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive or be he dead, I'll have his bones to grind my bread. Nonsense, dear, said his wife. You're dreaming. Or perhaps you smell the scraps of that little boy you liked so much for yesterday's dinner. Here you go and have a wash and tidy up, and by the time you come back, your breakfast will be ready for you. So 3 calves strung up at his belt. So it gives us a little bit of dimension of how big this giant actually is, where he can have 3 cows actually attached to his waist and still be able to walk. And then we find out he is a man-eater as well. He likes to eat little boys. And he ate a little boy the previous night for yesterday's dinner. So off the ogre went, and Jack was just going to jump out of the oven and run away when the woman told him not. Wait till he's asleep, says she. He always has a doze after breakfast. Well, the ogre had his breakfast, and after that he goes to a big chest and takes out a couple of bags of gold, and down he sits and counts till at last his head began to nod, and he began to snore till the whole house shook again. Then Jack crept out on tiptoe from his oven, and as he was passing the ogre, he took one of the bags of gold under his arm, and off he pelters till he came to the beanstalk, and then he threw down the bag of gold, which of course fell into his mother's garden, and then he climbed down, till at last he got home, and told his mother, and showed her the gold, and said, Wel't, mother, wasn't I right about the beans? They really are magical, you see. So they lived on the bag of gold for some time, but at last they came to the end of it, and Jack made up his mind to try his luck once more at the top of the beanstalk. So one fine morning he rose up early and got on the beanstalk, and he climbed 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 till at last he came out on the road again and up to the great tall house he had been to before. There, sure enough, was the great tall woman a-standing on the doorstep. Good morning, Mum, says Jack, as bold as brass. Could you be so kind as to give me something to eat? Go away, my boy, said the big tall woman, or else my man will eat you up for breakfast. But aren't you the youngster who came here once before? Do you know that very day my man missed one of his bags of gold? That's strange, Mum, said Jack. I dare say I could tell you something about that, but I'm so hungry I can't speak till I've had something to eat. Well, the big tall woman was so curious that she took him in and gave him something to eat. But he had scarcely begun munching it as slowly as he could when thump, thump, they heard the giant's footsteps, and his wife hid Jack away in the oven. All happened as it did before. In came the ogre as he did before, and said fee, fi, fo, fum, and had his breakfast of 3 broiled oxen. Then said, Wife, bring me the hen that lays the golden eggs. So she brought it, and the ogre said, Lay, and it laid an egg all of gold. And then the ogre began to nod his head and began to snore till the house shook. Then Jack crept out of the oven on tiptoe and caught hold of the golden hen and was off before you could say, Jack Robinson. But this time the hen gave a cackle which woke the ogre, and just as Jack got out of the house he heard him calling, Wife, wife, what have you done with my golden hen? And the wife said, Why, my dear? But that was all Jack heard, for he rushed off down to the beanstalk and climbed down like a house on fire. And when he got home, he showed his mother the wonderful hen and said, "Lay" to it, and it laid a golden egg every time he said "lay." Well, Jack was not content, and it wasn't long before he was determined to have another try at his luck up there at the top of the beanstalk. So one fine morning he rose up early and got to the beanstalk, and he climbed and he climbed and he climbed and he climbed till he got to the top. But this time he knew better than to go straight to the ogre's house. And when he got near it, he waited behind a bush till he saw the ogre's wife come out with a pail to get some water, and then he crept into the house and got into the copper. He hadn't been there long when he heard thump, 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 as before, and in came the ogre and his wife. "Fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman," cried the ogre. "I smell him, wife, I smell him." He recognizes the scent 2 other times before when he had lost things after he had that smell experience. But the wife this time is not going to have to say anything to protect Jack because she doesn't know Jack is there. Now, the story says that Jack hid in the copper. This is what a copper would look like. It's on your slide. It was a type of kettle that was used to either boil or to steam food. So he's hiding on the inside of that. "Do you, my dearie?" said the ogre's wife. "Then, if it's that little rogue that stole your gold and the hen that laid the golden eggs, he's sure to have got in the oven." How does she know he would have been in the oven? Because that's where she had put him before. But he's not there. He's in the copper. And they both rushed to the oven. But Jack wasn't there, luckily, and the ogre's wife said, "There you are again with your fee, fi, fo, fum. Why, of course, it's the boy you caught last night that you just boiled for your breakfast. How forgetful I am, and how careless you are not to know the difference between live and dead after all these years." So the ogre sat down to the breakfast and ate it. But every now and then he would mutter, "Well, I could have sworn." And he'd get up and search the larder and the cupboards and everything, only luckily he didn't think of the copper. After breakfast was over, the ogre called out, "Wife, wife, bring me my golden harp." So she brought it and put it on the table before him. Then he said, "Sing." And the golden harp sang most beautifully. And it went on singing until the ogre fell asleep and commenced to snore like thunder. Then Jack lifted the copper lid very quietly and got down like a mouse and crept on hands and knees till he came to the table, when up he crawled, caught hold of the golden harp, and dashed with it towards the door. But the harp crawled out quite loud, "Master, master!" and the ogre woke up just in time to see Jack running off with his harp. Jack ran as fast as he could, and the ogre came rushing after and would soon have caught him, only Jack had a start and dodged him a bit and knew where he was going. When he got to the beanstalk, the ogre was not more than 20 yards away, when suddenly he saw Jack disappear and when he came to the end of the road, he saw Jack underneath, climbing down for dear life. Well, the ogre didn't like trusting himself to such a ladder, and he stood and waited, so Jack got another start. But just then the harp cried out, "Master, master!" and the ogre swung himself down on the beanstalk, which shook with all his weight. Down climbs Jack, and after him climbed the ogre. By this time Jack had climbed down and climbed down and climbed down till he was very nearly home. So he called out, "Mother, mother, bring me an axe, bring me an axe!" And as his mother came rushing out with the axe in her hand, but when she came to the beanstalk, she stood stock still with fright, for she saw the ogre with his legs just through the clouds. But Jack jumped down and got hold of the axe and gave a chop at the beanstalk, which cut it half in two. The ogre felt the beanstalk shake and quiver, so he stopped to see what was the matter. Then Jack gave another chop with the axe, and the beanstalk was cut in two and began to topple over. Then the ogre fell down and broke his crown, his head, and the beanstalk came tumbling after. Then Jack showed his mother his golden harp, and what with showing that and selling the golden eggs, Jack and his mother became very rich, and he married a great princess, and they lived happily ever after. Okay, so you can see Jack is really not the most moral of people, and yet he is seen as a hero here. Maybe because people didn't like ogres. Maybe the ogre is standing in for someone else, another group of people that people generally don't like, or a bully, or just an enemy to a country. And one of the things people do like about Jack is the fact that he's trying to take care of his mother. Okay, so still an anti-hero, and yet the hero of his own fairy tale. Okay, we have time for one more, so let's do that. And it's very similar. See if you can figure out the similarities here. The Griffin. I know you're wondering what is on that plate. We'll get to it. There was once upon a time a king, but where he reigned and what he was called, I don't know. He had no son, but an only daughter, who had always been ill, and no doctor had been able to cure her. Then it was foretold to the king that his daughter would find her health by eating an apple. So he ordered it to be proclaimed throughout the whole of his kingdom that whosoever brought his daughter an apple with which she could find her health should have her to wife and be king. Okay, so this king has a sick daughter, and he says, well, I'm going to offer her hand in marriage if someone could just make her well. So it's supposed to be with an apple. Now, this means that anybody could become king. It wouldn't have to be somebody of royal blood, which is impossible in these days. You really had to have been at least of noble or royal blood. But this idea sounds really good. This became known to a peasant who had 3 sons, and he said to the eldest, go out into the garden and take a basketful of those beautiful apples with the red cheeks and carry them to the court. Perhaps the king's daughter will be able to find her health with them, and then you will marry her and be king. The lad did so and set out. When he had gone a short way, he met a hoary little man who asked him what he had there in the basket, to which he replied, Ueli, for so he was named, frog's legs. Now, these are frog's legs. Yum. No, I'm vegetarian for a reason. I love it. At this, the little man said, well, so it shall be and remain, and went away. At length, Ueli arrived at the palace and made it known that he had brought apples which would cure the king's daughter if she ate them. This delighted the king hugely, and he caused Ueli to be brought before him. But alas, when he opened the basket, instead of having apples in it, he had frog's legs, which were still kicking about. Ugh. On this, the king grew angry and had him driven out of the house. So the king thinks he's making fun of him. When he got home, he told his father how it had fared with him. Hang on a second. How it had fared with him. And then the father sent the next son. I'm sorry, I have to look up the name, how to pronounce this name again. It is pronunciation. And it keeps trying to do sesame. Yeah, it's telling me sesame anyway. So I think it's Shamey. When he got home, he told his father how it fared with him. Then his father said the next son, who was called Shamey, but all went with him, just as had gone with Ueli. He also met the hoary little man, and hoary just means he has a white beard and white hair. Okay, it just means like the color of hoarfrost, which is white. Who asked what he had in the basket. Shamey said, hog's bristles. Okay, hogs, especially wild, well, even domesticated, have these long bristles on their backs and around their snouts, and they are often used for a variety of purposes, like brushes and scouring things. But Shamey's saying, it's hog bristles. These two like to be sarcastic. What do you have in the basket? And they're going to give a sarcastic answer. The hoary man said, so shall it be and remain. When Shamey got to the king's palace, he said he brought apples with which the king's daughter might find her health. They did not want to let him go in, and said that one fellow had already been there and treated them as if they were fools. Shamey, however, maintained he certainly had the apples and that they ought to let him go in. At length they believed him and led him to the king. But when he uncovered the basket, he had but hog's bristles. This enraged the king most terribly, so he caused Shamey to be whipped out of the house. When he got home, he related all that had befallen him, whereupon the youngest boy, whose name was Hans, but who was always called Stupid Hans, came and asked his father if he might go with some apples. Oh, said the father, you would be just the right fellow for such a thing. If the clever one can't manage it, what can you do? So the father is being sarcastic too. So obviously he got it from, the kids got it from somewhere. But Hans, who is also called Stupid Hans by his family, is not sarcastic. He believes what he's told. Okay? The boy, however, insisted and said, indeed, father, I wish to go. Just get away, you stupid fellow. You must wait until you're wiser, said the father to that, and he turned his back. Hans, however, pulled at the back of his smock and said, indeed, father, I wish to go. Well, then, so far as I'm concerned, you may go, but you will soon come home again, replied the old man in a spiteful voice. The boy was tremendously delighted and jumped for joy. Well, act like a fool. You grow more stupid every day, said the father again. But Hans was not discouraged, and he did not let it spoil his pleasure. But as it was then night, he thought he might as well wait until the morrow, for he could not go to court that day. All night long he could not sleep in his bed, and if he did doze for a moment, he dreamt of beautiful maidens, of palaces, of gold, of silver, and of all kinds of things of that sort. Early in the morning he went forth on his way, and directly afterwards the little shabby-looking man in his icy clothes came to him and asked what he was carrying in the basket. Hans gave him the answer that he was carrying apples with which the king's daughter was to find her health. You notice he doesn't give a sarcastic answer because he's not a sarcastic person, and he gives a very complete answer. He doesn't just say, I'm carrying apples. He says, I am carrying apples with which the king's daughter will be made whole. She'll find her health. Then, said the little man, so shall they be and remain. But at the court they would have none of them let Hans go in, for they said 2 had already been there, who had told them they were bringing apples, and one of them had frog's legs, and the other hog's bristles. Hans, however, resolutely maintained he most certainly had no frog's legs, but some of the most beautiful apples in the whole kingdom. And he spoke so pleasantly the doorkeeper thought he could not be telling a lie, and asked him to go in. And he was right, for when Hans uncovered his basket in the king's presence, golden yellow apples came tumbling out. The king was delighted and caused some of them to be taken to his daughter, and then waited in anxious expectation until news should be brought to him of the effect they had. But before much time had passed, news was brought to him, and who do you think it was who came? It was the daughter herself. As soon as she had eaten those apples, she was cured and sprang out of her bed. The joy the king felt cannot be described, but now he did not want to give his daughter in marriage to Hans, and said he must first make him a boat which would go quicker on dry land than on water. Hans agreed to the condition and went home and related how it fared with him. Then father sent Ueli to the forest to make a boat of that kind. He worked diligently and whistled all the time. Okay, this is a motif we see quite often in fairy tales, where someone is promised something and then they go back on their word. And we know from reading lots of fairy tales and other stories, that's not going to work out well for the person who breaks their word. They're always going to get some kind of punishment, either naturally or through some kind of mankind justice, but it's usually through nature. Okay, so Ueli, who is not even told to make this boat, and it's not open to everybody, the father says, Ueli, you go make the boat, and he goes out and starts making the boat. The father totally neglects to congratulate Hans or to say, great, way to go, Hans, go make a boat. No, he wants his oldest to be the one to get the prize. Okay. At midday, when the sun was at its highest, came the little icy man and asked what he was making. Ueli, not learning his lesson, gave him for answer wooden bowls for the kitchen. The icy man said, so it shall be and remain. By evening, Ueli had thought he had now made the boat, but when he went to get into it, he had nothing but wooden bowls. The next day, Shami went into the forest, but everything went with him just as it had with Ueli. On the 3rd day, stupid Hans went. He worked away most industriously so that the whole forest resounded with heavy blows, and all the while he sang and whistled right merrily. At midday, when it was hottest, the little man came again and asked what he was making. A boat that will go quicker on dry land than on water, replied Hans. And when I've finished it, I am to have the king's daughter for my wife. Well, said the little man, such a one it shall be and remain. In the evening, when the sun had turned into gold, Hans finished the boat and all that was wanted for it. He got into it and rowed to the palace. The boat went as swiftly as the wind. The king saw it from afar, but would not give his daughter to Hans yet, and said he must first take 100 hares out to pasture from early morning until late evening, and if one of them got away, he should not have his daughter. Hans was content with this, and the next day went with his flock to the pasture, and took great care that none of them ran away. Can you imagine trying to herd rabbits? No. Before many hours had passed, came a servant from the palace and told Hans he must give her a hare instantly, for some visitors had come unexpectedly. Hans, however, was very well aware of what that meant, and said he would not give her one. Remember, he has to have all of them at the end of the day. The king might set some hare soup before his guests the next day. The maid, however, would not accept his refusal, and at last she began to argue with him. Then Hans said if the king's daughter came herself, he would give her a hare. That's not fair. It's supposed to be hair. The maid told this in the palace, and the daughter did go herself. In the meantime, the little man came again to Hans and asked him what he was doing there. He said he had to watch over 100 hares and see that none of them ran away, and then he might marry the king's daughter and be king. Good, said the little man. There is a whistle for you, and if one of them runs away, just whistle with it, and it will come back again. When the king's daughter came, Hans gave her a hare into her apron. But when she had gone about 100 steps with it, he whistled, and the hare jumped out of the apron, and before she could turn around, was back in the flock again. When evening came, the hare herd whistled once more and looked to see if all were there, then drove them to the palace. The king wondered how Hans had been able to take 100 hares to graze without losing any of them, but he still would not give him his daughter yet, and said he must now bring him a feather from the griffin's tail. A griffin is a mythological creature. So we have a little bit of people looking back into time and saying, Greek mythology. Let's talk about griffins. A griffin is supposed to be half lion, half eagle, but it really isn't supposed to have any feathers on its tail. But for this story, it does. Okay? It usually has a lion's tail. Hans set out at once and walked straight forward. In the evening he came to a castle, and there he asked for a night's lodging, for at that time there were no inns. The lord of the castle promised him that with much pleasure, and asked him where he was going. Hans answered, "To the Griffin." "Oh, to the Griffin. They tell me he knows everything, and I've lost the key of an iron money chest. So you might be so good as to ask him where it is." "Yes, indeed," said Hans. I will do that. Early the next morning he went onwards, and on his way arrived at another castle in which he again stayed the night. When the people who lived there learnt he was going to the Griffin, they said they had in the house a daughter who was ill, and they had already tried every means to cure her, but none of them had done her any good. And he might be so kind as to ask the Griffin what would make their daughter healthy again. Hans said he would willingly do that, and went onwards. Then he came to a lake, and instead of a ferry boat, a tall, tall man was there who had to carry everybody across. The man asked Hans whither he was journeying. "To the Griffin," said Hans. "Then when you get to him," said the man, "ask him why I am forced to carry everybody over the lake." "Yes, indeed, most certainly I'll do that," said Hans. Then the man took him up on his shoulders and carried him across. Okay, you may have seen a pattern here. There's 3 and 3. Okay, first he has the apples that he gives to the king, and the king says, "No, you can't marry my daughter." And then it was make a boat, and the king says, "No, you still can't marry my daughter." And the third one was the hares. "No, you can't marry my daughter." Then he gets the next section of the quest, and on his way to go to the Griffin to get the Griffin's tail feather, he meets 3 different groups of people. He meets 2 people in palaces, one of whom has lost a key, one of whom has a daughter who is sick, and then finally he meets a man who is a personal fairy. That's his whole job. He walks back and forth across a lake every day because he's really, really tall. People get on his shoulders and he walks them across. But he's wondering, why am I doing this? And Hans promises all 3 of these people that he will ask the Griffin, since the Griffin is supposed to know everything. At length, Hans arrived at the Griffin's house, but the wife only was at home and not the Griffin himself. There's another similarity to the Jack story. Then the woman asked him what he wanted. Thereupon he told her everything, that he had to get a feather out of the Griffin's tail, that there was a castle where they had lost the key of their money chest, and he was to ask the Griffin where it was, and that in another castle the daughter was ill, and he was to learn what would cure her. And then not far from thence there was a lake with a man beside it who was forced to carry people across it, and he was very anxious to learn why the man was obliged to do it. Then the woman said, "Look here, my friend, no Christian can speak to the Griffin." Again, we get this opportunity to look at monsters in the fairy tale world are the enemies of Christendom. So monsters like ogres and Griffins cannot stand being around Christians. They can smell them and they want to eat them. Okay. So this woman, the Griffin's wife, is saying no Christian can speak to the Griffin. He devours them all, but if you like, you can lie down under his bed, and in the night when he is quite fast asleep, you can reach out and pull a feather out of his tail. As for those things which you are to learn, I will ask about them myself. Hans is quite satisfied with this and got under the bed. In the evening, the Griffin came home, and as soon as he entered the room, said, "Wife, I smell a Christian." "Yes," said the woman. "One was here today, but he went away again." And on that the Griffin said no more. In the middle of the night, when the Griffin was snoring loudly, Hans reached out and plucked a feather from his tail. The Griffin woke up instantly and said, "Wife, I smell a Christian, and it seems to me that somebody was pulling at my tail." Okay, there are no Griffins, so I couldn't put a Griffin tail feather, so you get peacock instead. You can just pretend. Okay. I love this picture, by the way. I found it when I was doing the slides for this, and it's actually from this story. You can see Hans under the bed listening, but this cracks me up because they've got the Griffins actually in bed talking to each other, and she's wearing a little nightcap. That's too much. Okay, his wife said, "You have certainly been dreaming, and I told you before that a Christian was here today, but that he went away again. He told me all kinds of things, that in one castle they had lost the key to the money chest and could find it nowhere." "Oh, the fools," said the Griffin. "The key lies in the woodhouse under the log of wood behind the door." And then he said that in another castle the daughter was ill, and they knew no remedy that would cure her. "Oh, the fools." Sorry, I gotta stop that. Said the Griffin, "Under the cellar steps, a toad has made a nest of her hair, and if she got her hair back, she would be well." This is a little homage to witchcraft here. The idea that witches would use toads, and taking a person's hair, they could create a curse or a spell on them. So he's not accusing anybody of performing witchcraft, but he's saying there's definitely a toad with hair, which everybody from this era would have been going, "Oh, there's a witch around." And then he also said there was a place where there was a lake and a man beside it who was forced to carry everybody across. "Oh, the fool," said the Griffin. "If you only put one man down in the middle, he would never have to carry another across." Early the next morning, the Griffin got up and went out. Then Hans came forth from under the bed, and he had a beautiful feather, and he heard what the Griffin had said about the key, the daughter, and the man. The Griffin's wife repeated it all once more to him, that he might not forget it. See, even in fairy tales, within fairy tales, we've got repetition. The Griffin's wife repeated it all once more, that he might not forget, and then he went home again. First he came to the man by the lake, who asked him what the Griffin had said, but Hans replied he must first carry him across, and then he would tell him, because Hans, even though he's called Stupid Hans, isn't stupid. So the man carried him across, and when he was over, Hans told him that all he had to do was set one person down in the middle of the lake, and he would never have to carry over any more. See, if Hans had told him before then, he would be the one in the middle of the lake. The man was hugely delighted and told Hans that out of gratitude, he would take him once more across and back again. "You want another ride?" And Hans was like, "No, I really don't." But Hans said no, he would save him the trouble. He was quite satisfied already and pursued his way. Then he came to the castle where the daughter was ill. He took her on his shoulders, for she could not walk, and carried her down the cellar steps and pulled out the toad's nest from beneath the lowest step and gave it into her hand. And she sprang off his shoulder and up the steps before him and was quite cured. Spell broken. Then were the father and mother beyond measure rejoiced, and they gave Hans gifts of gold and of silver and whatever else he wished for, that they gave him. And when he got to the other castle, he went at once to the woodhouse and found the key under the log of wood behind the door and took it to the lord of the castle. He was not a little pleased and gave Hans as a reward much of the gold that was in the chest, and all kinds of things besides, such as cows, sheep, and goats. Walking money, those are. When Hans arrived before the king with all these things, with the money and the gold and the silver and the cows, sheep, and goats, the king asked him how he'd come by them. Then Hans told him the Griffin... Oh, Hans, you're going to lie right at the very end. The Griffin gave everyone whatever he wanted. So the king thought he himself could make use of such things and set out on his way to the Griffin. But when he got to the lake, it happened that he was the first one who arrived there after Hans. And the man put him down in the middle of it and went away, and the king was drowned. Hans, however, married the daughter and became king. So the king, who broke his promise, ends up getting punished. Hans, who only lied to the bad guy, is considered a hero. Okay. All right. That is our lecture for today. I know I do 2 lectures a day. I unfortunately am a little behind, and I apologize for that. It's all my fault. It's nothing for you guys. It's just I have to deal with that. So what I'm going to do, and tomorrow is usually a day that I give you guys to do your catch-up work. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to record another lecture tomorrow, and I'm going to make it available sometime tomorrow, but you don't have to look at it until Thursday at least. And I'm not going to try and do 3 lectures in one day. That's just too much because I have other lectures I have to do, and I have other homework I have to do. I'm just a little behind. That's all I can say. So we're only doing 1 lecture today, and then On Thursday, you'll have 2 like we regularly do, and then on Friday, you'll have 2. So go ahead and do a little bit of work at a time. I'm sorry I had to kind of cut it short today, but it's kind of the way it's working. I do apologize for that. And I will talk to you guys again on Thursday. Have a good night.